Tonight we go after the story of the woman who violated convention and bucked powerful opposition to lead the birth control movement in America.
Margaret Sanger, the leader of the birth control movement, and her actions were a significant turning point in history. Many positive outcomes arose out of her ideas, including that women were more in control of their bodies and had the option to choose when they wanted to have children and the number of children they wished to have. Sanger used her wisdom and horrific personal experiences to stand up for what she believed was right. Born in Connecticut but living in New York City, Anthony Comstock was the instigator of the Comstock Act and the opinionated man who believed the availability of contraceptives promoted lewdness. In 1873, Congress passed the law later to be known as the Comstock Act. This defined contraceptives as obscene and illicit. It was strictly a federal offense to disseminate birth control through the mail or across state lines. The law was so extreme that married couples could be arrested for using birth control in the privacy of their own homes and be subjected to a prison sentence. Birth control was considered a dirty word in the 1800s through early 1900s, but an intellectual, determined, and discerning woman by the name of Margaret Higgins spoke out against the Comstock laws and spoke for contraceptive rights for women. Her actions were a turning point in women's health. Higgins was born in Corning, New York on September 14, 1879. Higgins states that she had a difficult childhood. She attended Claverack College and Hudson River Institute in 1896. Her mother died at a young age from 7 miscarriages and the stress of birthing 11 children. Her mother's painful past was the genesis of the birth control movement, which led to a major turning point in the lives of many women throughout the world. After her mother's death, Higgins studied nursing at White Plains Hospital. She wasn't bothered by the sight of blood, and she latched on quickly to helping birth babies, for she stated that to see a baby born is one of the greatest experiences that a human being can have. Many of her patients asked her the same question: what should I do to not have another baby right away? Higgins didn't know how to answer these such questions, and they were simply set aside. As part of her nursing training, Higgins was assigned to the Manhattan Eye and Ear, where she met her husband, William Sanger. Anita Block called Sanger one night and asked her if she would be interested in helping her in a speech about labor. Sanger agreed, but she fell onto the topic of health. The audience was very interested, and Sanger even gave a second speech on the same topic. So many questions were brought up that Sanger composed her first series to ever be publicized in 1912, entitled What Every Mother Should Know. She also published a second series, What Every Girl Should Know. Margaret continued to be a nurse in New York City. One quote from her describes in detail the way things were in the places in which she worked. As a maternity nurse in the slums and tenements of New York, I have been brought face to face with conditions that made the so-called sacredness of motherhood a term of unspeakable irony. Pregnant women, drunken husbands, hungry children, children born to a heritage of disease, filth, crime. This was the order of the day. As one pregnancy followed another, a family sank deep into the mire, and always denied contraceptive knowledge by their doctors. These women were driven to other means. On Saturday evenings, before the office of a cheap abortionist, they lined up, each waiting her turn.
No matter what it may cost in health, in misunderstanding, in sacrifice, something had to be done, and I felt that I was called by the force of circumstances to do it.
Margaret knew there had to be a better way. She saw mother after mother in the same situation. In March of 1914, Sanger's first edition of The Woman Rebel was published. The Woman Rebel was a newspaper that was written and designed from her apartment. In the pages of her paper, she wrote what mothers needed to hear. She asked if there is any reason why women should not receive clean, harmless, and scientific knowledge on how to prevent conception. In the same edition of the paper, she explained her reasons for The Woman Rebel. In August of the same year, 2 agents from the Department of Justice warned her that she was indicted by the grand jury on 9 counts for publishing obscenities. Sanger began thinking of possible consequences to her daring actions, but decided to focus on answering the millions of questions her readers had for her. Sanger published Family Limitation, a pamphlet outlining various contraceptive methods. Margaret's court day approached in October, but to avoid prison, Margaret had a different plan. If I was to have a decent defense prepared, the only thing I could do was set sail for Europe, prepare my case adequately. Had I a right to leave the children without seeing them just once more? Peggy's leg was swollen from vaccination, and this kept worrying me. It almost upset my life. I knew there was no turning back once I boarded that train. While she was in Europe, she visited Holland to study with the heroic Dr. Johannes Rutgers, who had established birth control clinics in that country. In the example of the Holland clinics, Margaret discovered her model for the future of birth control clinics in America. On October 6, 1915, Margaret arrived back home in New York. Margaret's trial had been rescheduled for January 18, 1916. Not long after Sanger's return, her daughter Peggy became very ill from pneumonia and passed away on November 6. Sanger did not go to trial in 1916. Sanger was jubilant because now she could pursue her intentions.
She was ready to set up the first of her envisioned string of birth control clinics. She rented a place in Brooklyn, and with the help of her sister Ethel, they printed notices about her clinic. On the very first day, October 16th, hundreds of women were seen standing outside the entrance.
When Mrs. Margaret Sanger opened the first birth control clinic in the United States back in 1916, birth control was a dirty word.
Margaret's opinions about birth control were clear. She wanted abortions to not even be an option. She wanted to prevent conception entirely. She listened to story after story about mothers having too many children and fathers not having the money to provide for their family. She knew that if done by the right person, an abortion brings almost no danger to the life of the patient. But why take that chance, she asked. Not long after the opening of the clinic, Sanger was arrested. This time, she was sentenced to 30 days in jail. Sanger did have to spend time in jail, but the victory was actually hers. The New York Court of Appeals sustained her conviction, but Judge Frederick E. Crane's interpretation of the law had the effect of permitting physicians to give contraceptive information to a married person for certain health reasons. This included disease, and disease was now to include everything in the broad definition, not just venereal diseases. This was a massive turning point, for this opened the clinics and doctors' offices to women for birth control advice through the entire United States. The years from 1917 to 1921 were leaden years. These were permeated with constant labor in the battle of tuberculosis. In this span, Sanger founded, edited, and wrote for the Birth Control Review, wrote The Case for Birth Control, Women in the New Race, and the Pivot of Civilization, and traveled twice to Europe. She divorced her husband and married Noah Slee, who devoted his time and money to the birth control movement. The one-package decision was passed in 1936, which allowed physicians to send contraceptives through United States mail. This made contraceptives available, therefore practically anyone could have the accessibility to certain contraceptives, another turning point in Margaret's fight for birth control. In 1943, on June 21st, Noah Slee passed away. In her will, Margaret had instructions to be buried next to him. With the end of World War II, Margaret was able to return to her work. She knew that there needed to be a simple, safe contraceptive. In 1953, she met with Catherine McCormick and Gregory Pincus to discuss ideas. Margaret stated that we need a simple pill, or capsule. Pincus was an extremely gifted scientist. He has devoted his scientific life to his research on conception. Without a question, the pill was promoted into commercial success by Gregory Pincus. The pill was released in 1960. By 1962, 1.2 million women were using it. In 1966, on September 6th, the leader of the birth control movement and a respected woman throughout the world passed away. Her actions were not only a turning point in women's liberation, but it was the beginning of women having control over their bodies and choosing whether or not they wanted to have a child. Women no longer were suffering from back alley abortions or even abortions that were attempted by them. Because of Margaret Sanger, they had a way to escape from the pain that abortions and miscarriages brought. Because of Margaret Sanger, they had hope for a brighter future. While there are many positive aspects of the birth control movement, it also has some negative aspects. While using the birth control pill, the risk of contracting sexually transmitted infections is much higher than while using other forms of birth control. Margaret Sanger made an impact on society. Abortion is now illegal in 30 states and is only legal in the other 20 for certain circumstances. Birth control is now a normal part of the lives of millions of people throughout the world. Less women suffer from the stress and pain endured in miscarriage. Therefore, women are healthier than they were in the early 1900s.
In the eyes of some, Margaret Sanger has been a heroine. In the eyes of others, she's been a destructive force.
Margaret Sanger shall be remembered forever. Her ideas were a turning point in women's liberation. With her determined attitude, she achieved what she set out for. With her heart, she watched women suffer and chose to take actions to change the lives of many. Her ideas, her knowledge, and her legacy will never fade from America's history.
What emotions in your life made Margaret Sanger a crusader for birth control?
Well, Mr. Wallace, it's hard to say that any one thing has made one do this or that. I think from the very beginning, I came of a large family. My mother died young, 11 children. That made an impression on me as a child. I was a trained nurse, went among the people. I saw women who asked to have some means whereby they wouldn't have to have another pregnancy too early after the last child, the last abortion, which many of them had. So there's a number of things that are one after the other that really made you feel that you had to do something.